Shriram ji.
Namaste.
Just to introduce Dr. Shriram to everybody, Dr. Shriram Sarvotham has been practicing yoga since childhood and teaching yoga for nearly 3 decades. He studied with many renowned teachers, including Swami Bodhananda, Yoga Shiromani Krishnan Varma, Yogacharya Sri Vatsa Ramaswamy, Yogacharya Sri R. Subramaniam, and Sri Ravi Shankarji. Dr. Shriram's prime focus is to share authentic and holistic yoga practices that are rooted in the classic yoga texts. He has taught over 300 workshops and retreats all over the US and has led numerous mega yogathon events and has also given lectures and demonstrations at prestigious yoga conferences, the most recent one of which was our own AAYM conference, of which many of us were taking part in. Shriramji is a co-founder and director of the Ekashri Schools of Yoga. He is also a faculty of yoga teacher training programs for several yoga institutions and studios, including Yoga Bharati, which is a branch of S. Vyasa, Bangalore. Dr. Shriram is a recipient of the Exemplary Service Award in Yoga given by the Consulate General of India and the Yoga Service Award given by ISKCON. He holds a PhD in electrical engineering from Rice University, Houston, Texas, and works in the tech industry as a senior scientist in the Bay Area in California. His talk today will help us understand the nature of Samyama and its practice. So let me welcome Shriramji once again and hand over the floor to him.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rajshriji. I also would like to thank Vivekananda University for giving me this opportunity to share about this topic, which I'm very passionate about. This topic on inner discipline and how we can express excellence in whatever we do, whatever is our chosen end. How can we express excellence in that? It is a very core aspect of the Yoga Sutras given by Maharishi Patanjali. Most people think about yoga perhaps as just postures that we do inside a yoga mat. But when we study the Yoga Sutras, we discover that the core aspects of yoga are inner practices. And all the practices that we do with the body, such as asanas, and the practices that we do with our breath, namely pranayama, and kriyas and so forth, all these are subsidiary. They serve the purpose of bringing inner harmony. So there is an invocation chant on Maharishi Patanjali, which I'm going to chant right now to begin this session. So in this chant, you will notice that it says, Yogena Chittasya. That means Patanjali has given yoga for the chitta, for the mind. It doesn't say yoga for the body. So today we will touch upon the heart of yoga, the core aspects of yoga as described by Maharishi Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. So allow me to begin with this invocation chant on Maharishi Patanjali. Om Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yopakarotam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjaliranatosmi. So the meaning of this chant, I offer my gratitude, appreciation, reverence, honor, respect to this great sage, Maharishi Patanjali, for having bestowed humanity with 3 big gifts. One is the gift of yoga for the mind, Yogena Chittasya, yoga for the mind. The second big gift is Patanjali also is credited with a text on Sanskrit grammar, the Mahabhashya. So we are grateful to Maharishi Patanjali for clarifying the aspects of grammar so that we can express our speech. Our communication is better when we speak more clearly. Padena Vacham, our speech is purified thanks to his great work in Sanskrit grammar. And the third big gift that he has bestowed humanity, Malam Sharirasya cha Vaidyakena, which means we are grateful to Maharishi Patanjali for teaching us the healing science. He is also credited with a text on Ayurveda. In fact, it is said that Charaka of Charaka Samhita in the Ayurveda text. So Charaka was actually an incarnation of Maharishi Patanjali. So for these three big gifts, we are grateful to Maharishi Patanjali. So as we saw, Yogena Chittasya, yoga for the mind. And in this talk, I would like to focus on this aspect because many times when we jump into our yoga mat, we are very enthusiastic to practice yoga, and perhaps the spotlight has been shining for a very long time on this one aspect of yoga, namely asanas, because that's where all the action is. When we open a yoga book, we see pages and pages of pictures of yoga postures, perhaps very advanced postures, photogenic postures, but very little we read about the inner practices, the yoga for the mind. And in the next 40 minutes, I'd like to showcase this aspect of dedicating some time in our daily sadhana for inner discipline so that we can express excellence in whatever we do during the course of the day. And we will see how this works. We will see the mechanics behind it. We are going to examine the mechanics of the mind, and we will see how Samyama, which is the topic of today's talk, Samyama, we will see what is Samyama and how this works. What is the definition of this state of mind called Samyama? So when we look at the definition of yoga, so let's start from the basics. Let's start with the definition of yoga. We are going to see the dictionary definition of yoga, not what Patanjali says or not what the Bhagavad Gita says, but the dictionary definition of yoga. So when we talk about the dictionary meaning of any root word in Sanskrit, in Sanskritam, we consult this compendium of verb roots that were compiled by the great sage Panini, great grammarian Panini, in this work called Dhatu Patha. Dhatu Patha is a text which accompanies the Ashtadhyayi, which is the classic text on Sanskrit that he wrote. So accompanying the Ashtadhyayi, the core work, is this auxiliary text which enumerates close to 2000 verb roots, and it gives the meaning of these verb roots. So the word yoga has this verb root called yuj, and it appears 3 times in the Dhatu Patha. In other words, there are 3 meanings to the word yoga. The word yoga has 3 meanings. Usually when we ask people, what does yoga mean? You will hear one of the definition, namely to unite, to bring together in harmony, union, perhaps union of the body and the mind. That is one definition that is given in the Dhatu Patha. Yujir yoge, that is the definition. Yujir yoge, that which combines or unites, yokes together is yoga. That is one of the 3 definitions. So what does it mean? It means bringing a cohesive unity in all levels of our existence. For example, the body and the mind, 2 aspects of our existence. When they are going in different directions, it is not a very pleasant experience. For example, the body can be sitting in a place and listening to a lecture, whereas the mind can be having lunch, right? So body and the mind can be in totally 2 different places. They are divided. They are not in yoga in that moment. So whenever we become scattered or divided, it is like somebody is playing a tug of war on our body and the mind. Things are pulling us in different directions and it doesn't feel very good. We are stressed out. There is so much of tearing apart that happens. So when we unite all aspects of our existence together, there is an experience of harmony that comes. So when we bring the body, breath, mind, all this in harmony, they are in one place, they are together, then there is a sense of peace that we experience. So that is one definition of yoga, yujur yoge. The second definition that Panini gives in the Dhatu Pata is yuja samadhau. That means yoga is samadhi. Samadhi means equanimous state of mind. You will see many synonyms for the word samadhi, like samatvam. That means equilibrium of the mind. The mind is unperturbed even when there is external provocation. If somebody is trying to provoke us into anger or rage or frustration, it cannot happen for a yogi because their mind is so much in equilibrium, they are so centered that whatever buttons we push on them to provoke them, it is impossible to do so. So that state of mind is yoga. That is the second definition that Panini gives. In fact, it is said that Patanjali's definition of yoga, the famous sutra, yoga, chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is silencing or bringing tranquility to the mind. It is in harmony with the second definition of Panini, namely, yuja samadho. Yoga is bringing an equilibrium to the mind. And then Panini also gives a third definition to the word yoga. The third definition is yuja samyamane. Here is where this word, we are introducing this word samyama here. Yuja samyamane is the third definition of yoga. Yoga is samyama, he says. Panini says yoga is samyama. So what is samyama? Samyama is complete control over the inner faculties, complete control over our mind. The word yama, maybe it is familiar to all the yoga practitioners. Yama is the first of the 8 limbs of yoga, and then we have niyama and so forth. So samyama, we have a prefix sama or sam, which means the accumulated, the sum total. All aspects of the mind are in complete control. Yama means control, and samyama means complete control over the mind. So when we have this complete control over the mind, this state of mind is called samyama, and we will see what it is. Patanjali goes in detail to define this state, how exactly this state is experienced and how this state expresses itself and how this excellence is born out of it. We will see all that. So samyama is complete control, samyama. Now, the definition of the word samyama, so what do we mean by complete control over the mind? Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, he gives the definition. He says, Trayam ekatra samyamaha, the combination of 3 powers of the mind, or the combination of 3 practices, 3 inner practices is called samyama. So what are the 3 powers of the mind? And what are the 3 practices? It turns out that these 3 practices are the last 3 limbs of the Ashtanga Yoga. So the Ashtanga Yoga, which is the 8-limbed system of yoga, starts with yama, which is controlling ourselves, how we respond to the outer world. For example, ahimsa is a yama. Not getting provoked and not having hatred to anybody. So that state is one of the yamas. And Patanjali lists 5 yamas. And many of us may be familiar with that. The yamas, that's the first limb of yoga. Second limb is niyama, which is inner restraints or inner practices that we engage in, or inner disciplines such as cleanliness or contentment, like that, shaucha, santosha, etc. So the first 2 limbs are yama and niyama, and then the third limb is the asanas. Fourth is the pranayama, which is the breath work, regulating our breath. Is pranayama. Tasmin sati shwasa prashwasa yoho gati vicheda pranayama. Patanjali says that means shwasa prashwasa, the breathing in and breathing out, regulating the speed and the rhythm of the breath is called pranayama. And then we have pratyahara, which is the 5th limb of yoga. Pratyahara literally means drawing the senses inwards, allowing the senses to settle with the mind rather than going out getting extroverted and getting attached to things on the outside world, jumping around from one sensory object to the other, thinking that my happiness lies over there. So giving rest to our senses is the Pratyahara. So we covered 5 limbs of the Ashtanga Yoga. These 5 limbs are called external practices. They are called Bahiranga Sadhana. Bahiranga Sadhana means external practices. And the last 3 limbs, in a moment we are going to see what they are called the Antaranga Sadhana. Antaranga Sadhana means inner practices. They are Dharana, which is focus, mental focus or concentration, and we will go into it in a little bit more depth. And then the 7th limb is Dhyana, which is usually translated as meditation. And the 8th limb is Samadhi, which is equanimous state of mind. And we will also see in a little bit what does Samadhi mean. And Patanjali has actually given 2 definitions of Samadhi in the Yoga Sutras, and we're going to see them today. So the last 3 limbs, as you see, are inner practices. They deal with the mind directly. Focusing the mind, and then meditation of the mind, and equilibrium of the mind. Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. So the mind has 3 powers. The mind has the power to be one-pointed. From a scattered state of mind to a one-pointed state of mind. We have control over our mind. If we wish to, we can train the mind so that it becomes one-pointed. Many of us have not encouraged this if someone were to focus on something very important, we use the phrase, let me gather my thoughts. So our thoughts are in different places. They're running around in different places. Part of our mind is engaged in the task at hand. Part of our mind is already sitting on a vacation. Part of our mind is having lunch. So mind is in different places, scattered or shattered or broken. They say that when the mind is in pieces, there is no peace of mind. So when the mind is broken and in different places, then the mind is not focused, and therefore we lose out on this very powerful state. Whenever we want to do something very important and very efficiently, if you have to do it, I'm sure you'll agree with me, it's a good idea to gather the mind and bring the mind to one place. And we use the power of resonance here. When we integrate all parts of the mind to sit in one place, as they say, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. There is synergy that happens. When the mind is in one place, we are able to do things that were difficult before. It becomes easy to do very complex and very tasks that require high focusing of the mind. If you want to think about very subtle topics, say mathematics, or thinking about quantum mechanics, or some of these aspects which engage subtle thought, we need the mind to be focused in one place. So this is dharana. That is one power of the mind. And Patanjali defines what is dharana. And before we look at the definition of dharana, Patanjali himself says that the first 5 of the 8 limbs of yoga, they're qualitatively different from the last 3. As we saw, the first 5 is the Bahiranga Sadhana, external practices, and the last 3, namely Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi, are internal practices, Antaranga Sadhana. In fact, he makes this point by giving a chapter break between Pratyahara and Dharana. You'll see towards the end of the 2nd chapter in the Yoga Sutras, we conclude with the topic of Pratyahara. He has finished only the Ashtanga Yoga partially. First 5 limbs he enumerates and gives the sutras about them. And the last 3 limbs of yoga he addresses in the next chapter. So dharana, the definition of dharana is actually the first sutra in the 3rd chapter. Desha bandhas chittasya dharana is the definition of dharana or focus. So what does focus mean? Desha bandha. Bandha means to bind. The word bandha may be familiar to many yoga practitioners. Many of us may practice some bandhas, Jalandhara bandha, Uddiyana bandha, Mooladhara bandha, and so forth. Bandha means to lock. Here, Patanjali is talking about locking the chitta, the mind. So we lock the mind in one desha. Desha means a place. So the mind is not diffuse, going all over the place. It's not like flooded all over the place. It is highly focused. It is like a stream moving in one direction. And therefore, it is very powerful. When we bring the mind to a powerful focus, just like a magnifying glass, it collects the rays of the sun and brings that to a single point, it becomes so powerful. So like that, dharana is a powerful state of mind where we bring the entirety of the mind to one point or to one place. We bring a boundary to where the mind can graze around. My teacher used to call the mind, it's like a cow that is going in different places. And if we don't have a fence around it, it will keep going all over the place. It's like a random walk. So wherever it sees some grass, it will go there. So we put a fence around the mind and allow the mind only to be in that boundary. So we bind the mind. Desha bandha, chittasya dharana. So this is dharana. This is focus. And this is a strength of the mind that we can harness. Because when the mind is focused, we are able to do things that require very subtle thought. The second aspect of the mind is dhyanam. Dhyana is translated as meditation. So in meditation, the word is perhaps loaded and very overused, because when we use the word meditation, different people have different ideas about meditation. So what exactly is meditation? Patanjali gives a definition. So he says, Tatra pratyaya ekatanata dhyanam. Tatra pratyaya ekatanata dhyanam. Which means, from one moment to the next, the scenery that is in the mind remains identical. Pratyaya means that snapshot or the sum total of all the chitta vrittis, the activities that are happening in the mind. That scene is called pratyaya, the contents of the mind at any given snapshot of time. That is called pratyaya. And from one moment to the next, if the scenery in the mind is the same, it is identical, then the mind is in a state of meditation. Usually what happens? The mind is jumping from one moment to the next like a monkey. Swami Vivekananda gives the analogy of a monkey, not just a mischievous monkey, but a mischievous monkey who is drunk with the intoxicated by desire, he says. So a monkey that is intoxicated and whose tail is stung by a scorpion. So that's how restless our mind is. So from one moment to the next, the monkey mind is jumping around from one branch to another. And when we examine the thoughts that are running in the mind, from one moment to the next, sometimes they are not even connected thoughts. They are so disconnected. At one time, we could be thinking about one subject, and 5 seconds later, the mind is thinking about a totally different topic, unrelated to what we were thinking before, just few seconds back. So disconnected thoughts, and you will also notice most of the thoughts that run in the mind are also trivial thoughts, mundane or trivial, which is going to help nobody, not going to be helpful to us or to anybody else. So when we examine the thoughts in our mind, most of the thoughts are not high quality, Nobel Prize winning thoughts. They're very mundane or trivial thoughts. The Bhagavad Gita, it is said, Atatvar talpam cha tat tamasamudahritam. Means most of the thoughts in the mind are alpam. Alpa means trivial thoughts. So we deplete the precious resource of prana, the energy that we have, we are depleting it with so many useless thoughts, so many trivial thoughts. So what meditation does is we conserve this energy. In dhyana, we conserve this energy. So when Patanjali says tatra pratyaya ekatanata dhyanam, we are allowing the contents of the mind to be identical from one moment to the next, and therefore the mind is not moving around. The mind is in one place, and we will see how it looks like, how it is experienced by way of a couple of analogies that is given in the yoga texts. So this is meditation, when from one moment to the next, the pratyaya, the scenery is identical. So let me offer two analogies. The first one comes from Bhagavad Gita. In Bhagavad Gita, it is said, the mind of a yogi who is in meditation is like the light of a candle. Deepa, yatha deepo nivatasto nengate sopamasmrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogamatmanaha is the verse in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. It is said, mind of a yogi is like the flame, a deepa, like a flame of a candle in a windless place. Nivatasto, vata means air or wind. Nivata means windless place. So the flame of a candle that is lit in a windless place, it is not flickering, it is not moving, yet it is shining bright. Such is the state of the mind of a yogi. It is not flickering, it is not moving from one moment to the next, it is stationary. If you take a picture, if you take a snapshot of the flame of the candle, and after 5 seconds you take another snapshot, both these pictures will appear identical. The scenery is the same because the flame is not flickering, the mind is not moving around. And you will notice, when we say the scenery is the same, we are not talking about a lethargic or a stagnant state of mind. We are not talking about a tamasic state of mind. Tamas means darkness. Tamasoma jyotirgamaya. Darkness to light is the movement that we do in the practice of yoga. Here, that is why the analogy of the light is very helpful. Light is alive. Light is alive. For example, when we do Kapala Bhati, practice that perhaps many of us do in our yoga mat every day, Kapala Bhati literally means to shine the head, which is a metaphorical way to say, I'm going to make my alertness very sharp. The mind is no longer in a lukewarm state of aliveness. The mind becomes so bright, brilliant mind, crystal clear mind. So such is the state of mind that practices such as pranayama or the Kapalabhati that gives this clarity of mind. So such is the state of yogi's mind in meditation. So that is one analogy that is given. Another picture to behold what is meditation is pouring of oil. So this analogy is given in Sage Vyasa's commentary of the Yoga Sutras. So he says, when you pour oil, the oil is moving in a very thin thread when you pour it slowly, and when you look at it from a distance, you don't even see the flow of the oil. It looks like a thin thread that is stationary. Sometimes when you open a tap and the water flows very fast, gushing movement of water, it is turbulent state of water. It is gushing very fast. Whereas when you pour oil, it is what is called a laminar flow. It is a very streamlined laminar flow. It is not turbulent. It is laminar flow. The thoughts are not going in a stampede. My teacher used to use the word stampede. It's not a stampede of thoughts. It's a very peaceful flow of that pratyaya, that scenery. In fact, Patanjali himself says, in a meditative state, there is prashantavahita samskarat. That means there is a flow of peace in the mind. When the mind is in meditation, there is an experience of a flow, and that flow is peaceful. Just like when you pour oil and the thin thread of oil that you can see, and from a distance, you don't even see the flow. You just see that thread and that scenery that remains identical from one moment to the next. You see the same pratyaya across time. So this state of mind is called meditation. And Patanjali enumerates so many benefits of meditation. For example, he says, dhyana heyas tadvrittayaha. That means by the practice of meditation, when we bring the mind to dhyanam, then the vrittayaha, the activities that give rise to kleshas, which are the miseries or afflictions, such as craving and aversion and ignorance and so forth, all those will be destroyed. We won't feel miserable anymore when we bring the mind to a meditative state. All the miseries can be terminated or they can be eradicated with the help of meditation. And then he also says a very interesting benefit of doing meditation, of being in meditation. is Tatra Dhyanajam Anashayam. That means whatever thoughts or actions that we are inspired to do from a meditative state will always be beneficial actions. They will never bind us in future. A technical way to say that is, whatever actions we are inspired to do from a meditative state is free of karma, which is a very fascinating insight that Patanjali has given. Any thought that we are inspired to from a place of meditation is always brings benefit. It will never bring detriment. It is always beneficial. It will not bring bondage in the future. There is no karma bandha associated with that action. So this is meditation, dhyanam. And then the third aspect is samadhi. That is the last limb of the Ashtanga Yoga, samadhi. So what is samadhi? The word meaning of samadhi is equanimous state of the intellect. Dhi means intellect. Sama means same or equilibrium. Samadhi means equanimous state of the mind. Patanjali gives a more technical definition. In fact, he gives two definitions. One of the definition he says is Tadeva arthamatra nirbhasam swarupa shunyam iva samadhi. That means whatever is the object of our awareness, we are so engrossed in it. The mind becomes one with it that we forget ourselves. Such state of mind is called samadhi, which is a very interesting definition. It's like salt dissolving in water. Like that, when we are engrossed in something, we dissolve in the thought. We forget ourselves. We forget the body. We forget what is my name, where am I, and we become so engrossed in it. Perhaps a state that happens when many of us watch movies. We are so engrossed in the movie, we become part of the movie. Perhaps that is one state of samadhi. But Patanjali says that is a deliberately attainable state. It's not like only certain activities will bring samadhi, but when we are able to have a control of getting to that place of samadhi at will, deliberately. So that is where the yogic control, the inner disciplines come in. So samadhi, Patanjali describes as engrossment. We become one with the observer and the observed, they merge into one. So there is a feeling of being engrossed in the scenery and forgetting the body, mind, etc. For example, one of the definition of health, physical health, that is given in Ayurveda is when you forget your body, you are healthy. When you forget your body, the body is in good health, which is a very fascinating definition of health, because we become keenly aware of the body when something goes wrong. For example, when we have a headache, we become keenly aware of our head. When there is no headache, we don't constantly remind ourselves, oh, I have a head, I have a head, I have a head. We don't keep reminding ourselves. Only when something goes wrong, it vies for our attention. For example, only when we stub our toe do we recognize, oh, I have a toe. Otherwise, we don't keep thinking about our toe. So when the mind recedes into the background and we have an immersive experience of whatever is the activity or the object of attention, that engrossed state of mind is called samadhi. We forget the body, we forget the concerns of the mind, etc. We are so engrossed in what we are doing. So this is the third power of the mind. So we have seen three powers, right? Dharana, which is focus, dhyanam, which is meditation, and samadhi, which is engrossment. Let me mention a couple of benefits of samadhi that Patanjali gives in the Yoga Sutras, which are very fascinating. So when we become deeply engrossed in something, when we are in the state of samadhi, he says, we tap into the reservoir of intuition. Creativity blossoms and intuition comes. We can tap into this power of the mind, which is the intuitive abilities. We awaken this talent, which perhaps is lying dormant in many of us. We can awaken this skill or this power, inner power from within us. So what Patanjali says, very interesting couple of sutras. Ritambhara tatra prajna, he says, when the mind is in samadhi, then that mind is now filled with ritam, means truth, not just factual truth, but deep universal truth. Patanjali doesn't use the word satyam. He says ritam. Ritam bhara tatra prajna. The mind is filled with universal truths, the truths of like the bigger questions. Who am I? What is the nature of the universe? What is the purpose of this existence? So all this revelation comes. All these answers can be revealed in that state. Intuition brings revelatory knowledge. Ritambhara tatra prajna. And then he goes on to say, Shrutanumana pragyabhyam anya vishaya visheshar tattvat. That means that knowledge that we gain through intuition is of a far higher quality, much higher quality than logical or inferential knowledge. Anumana, logical or inference, can only take us so much, but intuition can take us very far. Not only that, this knowledge that we gain through intuition is superior to second-hand knowledge that we hear from others or by reading a book and so forth. Shruta, whatever we hear from others, or Anumana, whatever we infer through the process of thought or logic or inference. So intuition is far more superior. Intuitive knowledge is far superior to that. And we see this in many of the genius, like genius thought. When we think of, for example, the great mathematician Ramanujan. So when he came up with the power of his intuition, all these formulae that were revealed to him, even it was hard for him to come up with a proof. How do you prove it that it is true? And for him, it was obvious, self-evident, because he can see it through the eyes of intuition. So that is the power we tap into when we reach that state of samadhi. Okay, we have talked about dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Now we enter this place called samyama. Samyama, what is samyama? Samyama is the combination of these three. Trayam ekatra samyamaha. When all these three powers of the mind are concurrent, they are in the same place. This powerful state of mind is called samyama, and this is the complete control. And as many things in the practice of yoga, when we combine the different powers or the different modes, synergy happens. Synergy means 1 plus 1 equals 3. That is, the combination is more powerful than the mere sum of its parts. So when we combine focus, meditation, and engrossment, mind becomes more powerful than the mere addition or the sum of these three powers. There is some extra punch that we get. And this state of mind, where the powerful resonance happens, the synergy happens, is called samyama. And this samyama, when we combine and make these three powers concurrent, is such a powerful state that Patanjali says, whatever yogic powers you want to achieve. So the third chapter of the Yoga Sutras is all about yogic powers. It's called the Vibhuti Pada. It means the chapter on yogic attainments or yogic powers. And he enumerates dozens of powers of the mind. He says, you need only one key to unlock all these attainments, all these vibhutis. That key is samyama. So with samyama, we are able to achieve excellence in any endeavor, in any activity of our choice. For example, if you want to become a great artist, or a great sports person, or a great mathematician, or a great engineer, or a great cook, great singer, if you want excellence in any chosen field, this one key, namely samyama, will unlock the power of excellence. And my teacher used to give his definition of siddhi. Siddhis are these attainments. Siddhis is effortless excellence. For example, when we see a great master musician, when they perform on their instrument or when they sing, It is so effortless for them, yet you can see the excellence. So when the excellence comes, when the excellence is expressed, it is not through struggle and effort. It comes so effortlessly for them. So this combination of effortless excellence is what we can achieve with the power of Samyama. So when we talk about the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga, we started with Yama. And next was Niyama. And then we go through this ladder of the 8 limbs, and then we end up in Samyama. So we start with Yama and then Niyama and go through these limbs and then end with this Samyama. So this is the true culmination. Samyama is the true culmination of Ashtanga Yoga. Many think that Samadhi is the final, the culmination, because that is the 8th limb or the 8th anga of Ashtanga Yoga. But Patanjali says, no, we have to still combine the last 3, the Antaranga sadhanas, namely Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. And then we are able to tap into this very powerful state of mind called Samyama. I'd like to close by giving an analogy. This analogy I cooked up myself. So how can we behold this power of Samyama? For example, we looked at some analogies for meditation, like the light, the deepa shining in a windless place, or the pouring of the oil. So how does Samyama look like? So Samyama is a combination of focus, meditation, that means Pratyahara is the same from one moment to the next, and that evenness of Samadhi, that engrossment or the evenness. So I would say that Samyama is like a laser beam. Laser beam. So when you shine a laser beam, it is focused in one direction. So dharana is there. And when you look at the laser beam from a distance, you see one beam of light. And from one moment to the next, it is not flickering, it is not turbulent. You just see that beam. So meditation is there because the pratyaya, the scenery, is same from one moment to the next. And then Samadhi is there because the power of the laser beam comes from coherence. Coherence means all the light waves, they are stepping in the same phase. They are in the same rhythm. Samadhi, evenness, all the light waves are in the same rhythm. They're coherent. And this combination is what gives the laser beams such great power. In fact, even with a commercially available laser pointer that we use in our presentations, when we make a PowerPoint presentation, it is so powerful that in fact it can go several kilometers, several miles, and people say that it can also reach the moon. Such is the power of that laser beam. You can actually see that spot on the moon. That's what I read somewhere. So when the mind becomes like a laser beam, it can penetrate and explore all the secrets of that the universe has to offer. And that is what Patanjali explores in the Vibhuti Pada, in the chapter on the excellence, how to express excellence in different activities. So this is what Samyama is about. And I find this topic very fascinating because when we do our yoga sadhana, many times our emphasis becomes body level. We don't tap into the teachings that Patanjali gives on these higher states, higher yogic states. And perhaps it's a good idea to experience the fullness of yoga, not just what yoga does for our circumference or the periphery, namely the body, but tap into what yoga has to offer fully, the holistic practice of yoga. So thank you very much for your enthusiastic attention. And let me hand over to Rajshri. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Thank you so much. That was just incredible. It's like I actually felt time standing still while you were talking. I can't believe we've really spent about over almost 45 minutes listening to you. And thank you so much for that. Now, before we move on to the Q&A session, let me just take a few minutes to talk about the MS Yoga program. And for that, I'd like to share my screen. Give me a second here. So just once again, going to just a few words about VaYU. As I said, this is the first yoga university outside of India. Please come on, let's move on. Here we go. And right now we have the online Master of Science program, which will be starting a new session in August. These are our collaborators whom I mentioned earlier. So just to give you an idea about this program, it's a flipped classroom type of program where I said before, we have an interactive session with the faculty members once a week, whereas most of the learning material is posted on the website that we can access throughout each week. We are having an open house session tomorrow at 5 p.m. and it will be, we will have the same open house session twice more, the last one being on the 1st of August. Our next distinguished webinar series would be on neurobiology of yoga by Dr. Christine Weber. And to just give you my own experience with, let me just stop sharing that screen. Are you guys still able to see this, my screen, or?
Yes.
You still can. I just have to, I don't know why. Here we go.
Yeah, I have stopped.
Okay, there you go. Thank you. It's because I was trying to do too many things at once. Sorry about that. Okay, so the program, the Master of Science program that we have now in yoga therapy is a 4-semester program. We are taught yoga, yoga therapy, basics of the Sanskrit language, as well as ancient yoga texts and their philosophy. Students can choose one of 3 streams, that is yoga therapy, yoga research, or yoga philosophy. And speaking from personal experience, this has been a really wild ride, this last 2 semesters that we've had. In fact, I was speaking to a friend in England today who was asking me about the program, and I realized that I had spoken nonstop for about 20 minutes, and then suddenly I asked, oh my God, I haven't asked you anything about yourself, because it had been a long time since we had been speaking to each other. And she said, you know, you were talking so passionately about it. I was happy to listen. So I think that is the experience of every one of us who are in the program right now. Our first, we belong to the first class, so we will be starting our 3rd semester in August this year. And, you know, the 30 students that are in the class are, you know, we have become so close. It's become like family. Everyone is very supportive and encouraging of each other. We each come with a different set of abilities and a different level of knowledge and in different fields. So different parts of the program are easier for different people. And together we have done a great job in, you know, pulling everyone along to come up to the same level. Our interactions with the faculty has been incredible. It's like actually having a satsanga on the weekends when we have those office sessions. So that's my little bit that I can say about the program. Like I said, we do have open houses tomorrow and for 2 Sundays after that. So please feel free to attend, and please invite your friends to attend. We will have, we are having a poll that will be shown in a few seconds. Please do take an opportunity to give us your feedback. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else I have forgotten to say. I believe I've said everything. There's your poll. I'm sure you can see it on your screen right now. Please take part in that poll. Now, the other thing, yes, there was one more thing I wanted to say. The admissions are going to close on the 1st of August. So if anyone is interested in applying to this program, please start your process now. And please also encourage anybody else you know who is interested to join. So let's now come back to Dr. Shriram and go through some of the questions. And I'm sure the answers will be just as interesting as some of these questions. So a couple of questions. The first question is, creative mind consists of correlating disparate principles and thoughts and circumstances into a new concept. So how does a focused mind relate to a creative mind?
So that's a very good question, Lataji. So in fact, what Patanjali says is the creative aspect of the mind comes not through dharana. It's not through focusing the mind, but it is through the other two, namely through dhyanam, meditation, and especially samadhi. That is when we tap into the creative aspect and the intuitive aspect of the mind. So what Patanjali says is, when we look at dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, we are able to take full advantage of all the modes of the mind from one end of the spectrum, where you focus the mind into one point, which is called parama anu. Anu means like an atom. You bring the mind to such a powerful focus into such a small space, like the space of an atom. As well as the mind can become diffuse and become aware of the whole, which is parama mahat, he says. Parama mahat. The mind can become aware of the entire scenery, not just one pointed focus, but it can be diffuse. The creative aspect comes from bringing the awareness to this diffuse space. So that sutra where Patanjali says that is parama anu, parama mahatwantosya vashikaraha. Vashikaraha means that control. A yogi has the control of the mind. They can bring the mind and focus it to one atom, he says, parama anu. And they can also bring the mind so diffuse, they become aware of everything. Sometimes we need the mind not to be focused. There are certain situations where we want the mind to be diffuse, not focus on something. Let me give an example where we want the mind not to be focused. The example is that of a warrior. So when a warrior is engaged in, like they're having a duel, they're having a fight with another warrior, if they're too focused, thinking that the opponent is going to strike them in a particular way, the opponent could surprise them by striking through a different place. You see, if our focus is on the opponent's hand, and all our dharana, our focus is on the hand and being watchful and careful about the hand, where the hand is moving, but they can kick with the leg, you see. So if you're not focusing on the leg, then we may be surprised. So for a warrior, we need the awareness to be diffuse so that it is sensing the whole environment. You're not bringing the mind to focus, but you're sensing the whole environment. Like the deepa that we saw, the example of the light, the flame of the candle, that light is not like a flashlight. It is not even like a laser beam. That light is going all 360 degrees. So that is also an example of meditation without dharana. So the mind is meditative, but it is not focused. It is not one-pointed. On the other hand, the other analogy that we saw, namely pouring of the oil. In that example, if you notice, we are combining focus, and meditation. You see, because you're pouring the oil in one particular spot, and the pratyaya, the scenery from one moment to the next, is also same. So there are times when defocusing the mind will bring benefit. Like, for example, if you want to sense the whole environment, if say, we know that there's a burglar or an intruder that may be at home. Now, you don't want to focus all your awareness on one door or one window. They might come from the chimney, right? They might come from any place. So we want the awareness to be diffuse. So sometimes we need to defocus the mind. And that's why Patanjali says, Parama Anu, Parama Mahatvantosya Vashikaraha. So that Parama Mahat, when the mind is diffused, that's when creativity happens. That's when we sense so many things. And because we see the global, the big picture, we're able to make the connections. And the mind becomes highly creative there.
Thank you, Shriramji. I'm going to ask a similar simple question. So you described being engrossed in a movie or music as samadhi. So then what's the difference between that kind of samadhi and a state achieved through dharana dhyana?
That's an excellent question, right? Because we can give the excuse, okay, I want to take 2 hours and be in samadhi, I'm going to watch a movie. So the main difference is that a yogi is able to bring the mind to samadhi at their own. So we are not giving the power away to a movie. I need this external aid in order for me to be engrossed. And one more thing is, when the mind is in dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, we feel alive. There is a feeling of upliftment. So during samadhi, and also when we come out of the practice of, say, meditation, we feel more alive. And during the course of the day, the mind is more clear, crystal clear. Sometimes, by watching movie for a long time, I'm sure many of us have had this experience. Being a couch potato and watching for a long period of time, then the mind becomes numb. Mind becomes less sensitive, becomes numb. And my teacher used to say there is a very thin difference between a tamasic state of mind and a sattvic state of mind that is in samadhi. Because viewed from outside, both people seem to be immobile, they are not restless. But one person is in tamas, they're stagnant. The mind is like not moving, there's no flow in the mind. Whereas in samadhi and in the dhyanam, there is a flow. In fact, as I mentioned, Patanjali talks about this prashantavahita samskara. There is a flow of peace. And there is a book by the name Flow. The title of the book is Flow. And it talks about how when people are expressing excellence, like great sports person or great scientists or engineers and so forth, when they go into that zone of high creativity, they describe that state as a flow. In other words, it's not a static, it is not a stagnant state, but they describe a flow as if a moving stream is there. So that flow state, it's a very harmonious state, is it gives the analogy, it's a metaphorical way to say that it is a state of aliveness, it is not stagnant. So that is a big difference between being engrossed in something and then finding ourselves to be numbed by that.
That was incredible. Thank you so much. Our next question, it's a little long. That you mentioned genius Ramanujan is interesting. His hands had the callus of a laborer from writing with chalk, and later he filled books with his writings of mathematical steps, many of which were crossed out because he found them wrong. So it's a torturous, in his own words, spending his time in leisure state that he followed seeking the truth. So it is not magic. How do we interpret this with intuition?
So it's a fascinating thought. You know, when we look at how much dedication and devotion, commitment with which they did that work. So to take the example of Ramanujan and how he spent every waking moment of his life devoted to mathematics, and that's how the excellence came. So it didn't come because he was forced to do it. It's not like he was struggling with it. That drive to be committed to that activity came from within. So it was not something enforced, or he didn't think of it as a struggle. Or even great musicians, when they are so much devoted to music, they do hours and hours of sadhana, prayas, sadhana, and they don't find it a torture at all. In fact, they find inspired to do it. Inspiration comes. And this is reminiscent of what Patanjali says about the or the qualities, the ingredients of a high quality sadhana. So when we do our yoga practice every day, we can bring that same level of inspiration and commitment. And Patanjali, he actually gives clarity on this topic. He says, Satu Dirghakala Nairantarya Satkara Asevito Dridabhumihi. That means if we want to bring our mind to such states, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, then regular practice that have these four ingredients, namely Dirghakala. This has to be done over a long period of time. It is not just a weekend thing. We do it every day for several months, years, decades. And then Nairantarya, without taking a break, without saying, oh, this is Thanksgiving today, I'm going to take a holiday. No, doing the practice every day without a break. And then Satkara, doing the practice with honor and respect, with enthusiasm, not with grumbling attitude. Oh, I committed to do this practice. Now I have to drag my body in the yoga mat. It's not with that attitude we do it. We do it with so much enthusiasm. Wow, it's 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm so excited to begin my practice of yoga. And with that beaming smile and enthusiasm, we jump into the yoga mat and begin our practice. So that level of enthusiasm is satkara. And asevido is the fourth ingredient, which is doing these practices with a sense of service, not with a sense of selfish attitude, but with a sense of serve the body, serve the cells of the body, and serve the environment. Because when we purify our body and mind, then we are giving that gift to the world. We are offering a better version of ourselves to all the people with whom we interact. So these four ingredients you will find in all the genius people who are dedicated to their chosen endeavor. And it comes naturally. They don't look at it as a torture. It's not like, oh, I need to work on my math. I need to devote 1 hour. How much time should I practice yoga? How much time should I practice my mathematics? That Ramanujan will never ask. He will just devote his time. So that is the level of commitment. Satu Dirghakala Nairantarya Satkara Sevito Dridabhumihi. Now, why do we do this? Because I just mentioned it very briefly. When we examine our mind, remember we saw that our mind is usually very scattered, but we want to bring the scattered mind to a one-pointed state of mind in dharana. In order for this transformation to happen, Patanjali calls it parinama. For this transformation to happen, we need to take step-by-step approach. And one fine day, there is a tipping point that happens. Tipping point. And suddenly the mind becomes one-pointed naturally. Right now, the natural state of mind is a scattered state of mind. And then when we do our sadhana, perhaps for a few seconds, it is one-pointed. But there comes a time with daily practice that the power of the mind to be one-pointed becomes stronger than the tendency of the mind to be scattered. You see? So this is when that tipping point happens. This is a very magical moment in yoga, in a yogi's path of yoga. So this is called parinama, means transformation. And that is why all these practices, even if we take little steps in these practices, there is a powerful moment, parinama, the tipping point that happens, and the mind always becomes one-pointed, or always becomes tranquil in meditation, or always becomes engrossed, evenness of the mind.
Wow. Thank you so much. That was beautiful. So here's another question. Actually, there are two questions here. Shriramji, I'm just going to ask you if you are able, so there's two questions here and I have one more. So is it okay if we run over time for a few minutes?
Sure, certainly.
And you can tell us when you want to stop and we will stop there, okay?
Sure.
So let me read the next two questions, which are by the same person. Are dharana, dhyana, and samadhi dependent on each other? For example, dhyana can improve dharana and samadhi. So that's one question. And the other one is, as one goes through the day and doing different activities, does the state of mind change? More in dharana sometimes and more in dhyana at other times, and so on.
That's a very interesting question. So let me start with the second part first, because I think that's a little easier. So when we examine the state of mind during the course of the day, usually it's not in any of these three states, right? Usually the mind is partially here, partially over there. It is scattered all over the place. And usually the mind is not tranquil in meditation, because there's a chatter of the mind. Arjuna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Chanchalam hi manah Krishna. Mind is always in a chanchala state, restless state. So it is not like the same pratyaya, the same contents of the mind is there from one moment to the next. And usually the mind is not in samadhi, because the mind goes through the roller coaster ride. When somebody provokes us, we do get depressed or we do get elated when they praise us. So that ups and downs, the roller coaster ride. My teacher used to say, from a yo-yo mind to a yoga mind. That is the transformation we are seeking. So rather than going up and down, from a yo-yo up and down, bring the mind to a state of samadhi. So usually during the course of the day, we are neither in dharana, nor in dhyana, nor in samadhi. So that's where, when we commit ourselves to a regular practice, when we devote ourselves, say half an hour or 1 hour of practice in the form of a sadhana, then we strengthen the tendency of the mind to be one-pointed, tendency of the mind to be tranquil, and tendency of the mind to be at equilibrium. We encourage these tendencies. And in course of time, after say a few months, as Patanjali says, Dheerghakala, Satu Dheerghakala, after some amount of time, you will notice the transformation will happen. And after that, the mind will listen to you rather than the other way around, where the mind takes us through this roller coaster. The mind will now be tame. In other words, it will listen to us. And the other question, are they dependent upon each other, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi? What I have noticed is that different scholars, when they give their perspectives, when they write their commentaries on the Yoga Sutras, they offer different ways. Some say that they are dependent and there's a sequence. For example, we need to be in dharana first before we go to dhyana, and then dhyana before we enter samadhi. It should be in that sequence. Some say that they are three independent modes of the mind or powers of the mind, and we need to work on them, just like the three legs of a chair or the four legs of a chair. When you pull one leg of a chair, the entire chair comes along with it. So when we practice dharana, we're also encouraging the power of dhyana and samadhi as well. You see, so they all are the same anga. Anga literally means a limb. So when you pull one leg, the whole body of the chair comes along with it. So in fact, this is true of the entire Ashta Anga, all the 8 limbs. Even by practicing asanas, we're actually encouraging the power of the mind to be focused and to meditate and to be in samadhi. So every anga, each of the 8 limbs helps us with the other limbs as well. In fact, let me share one thing that my teacher used to say. Once somebody asked my teacher, I want to do this advanced yoga posture, very flexible posture, a deep back bend. And that student was trying for a very long time, and she was still not able to achieve that posture after like 2 years. So she was a little not very happy with the progress that she was making. So she approached the teacher and said, "Oh, tell me some practice, give me some tips, step-by-step way, so that I can bring the feet to the head in a deep back bend." And the answer that my teacher gave was very surprising. It surprised all of us. He said, meditate more. Rather than trying to fight with the body and taking step by step just to the body alone, exploit the power or harness the power of the mind. Because when we meditate, the body will relax. The muscles will not be tight anymore. you'll be more flexible. And indeed, it came true. After a few weeks, she was able to do that posture. She said, thanks to my teacher for giving that very subtle advice, how meditation can help the body. Dhyana is helping asana here. Like that, each of the 8 limbs help the other 7 limbs as well.
Thank you. One more question, and this also may sound silly to you, but when I read that third chapter, and Patanjali is talking about some of these yogic powers, like getting bigger or smaller or heavier or lighter or whatever, it sounds a little superfluous to me. Why are these important? Why does anyone need these siddhis?
Yeah, in fact, Patanjali agrees with you. He says these siddhis are not really important. He says towards the third chapter, Tad vairagyadapi dosha bija kshaye kaivalyam. That means you need to let go of the attachment to all these siddhis, offer vairagya to them, be dispassionate to them, not be attached to these powers, and then you will reach kaivalya, he says. So Patanjali just gives these as like signposts. So in the path of yoga, you will see all these signs. That is a way to measure the progress in yoga. These are the power. The mind becomes so subtle that you will tap this potential of the mind and so forth. And perhaps it is also a way to inspire some of the beginning students of yoga. Oh, my mind can really do that? Wow, I didn't know that. So let me see whether it is really true. So it gives like a big vision. The possibility, the seed of possibility, Patanjali plants in our mind. Wow, my mind is capable of that. So perhaps that is why he gives all the siddhis.
Wow. So I think I don't see any more questions. Oh, here's one more. How can one be detached and passionate?
Yes, thanks, Lataji. That's a brilliant question. Like, how can we be detached and passionate? Because you are right. When we talk about vairagya, which is one of the integral aspects in yoga, Patanjali says, Abhyasa vairagyabhyam tannirodha. That means the practice of yoga, both abhyasa, which is the regular practice, as well as vairagya, means detachment. And usually this word is translated as dispassion. Now, dispassion, I think, is a very unfortunate translation. It's because it doesn't give the full picture of what vairagya is. So when we say dispassion, it seems to suggest no passion. In other words, not being intense. Dispassionate means being apathetic. That is the not interested in anything. That is the picture that we get when we hear the word dispassion. But that is not what is meant by vairagya. So vairagya means, in fact, Patanjali talks about vairagya in 2 steps. The first step is recognizing where our happiness is not. My happiness doesn't reside on the objects outside. That is the first step. Drishtanu Shravika Vishaya Vitrishnasya Vashikara Samya Vairagyam is what Patanjali says. That means recognizing that the outside objects that we perceive through our senses is not the source of our happiness. That is the first step of dispassion. The second step of dispassion is the higher dispassion called Parama Vairagya. The highest dispassion is recognizing where the happiness truly is. You see, what is the true source of happiness? Recognizing that. And that happiness, Tatparam Purushakyater Gunavaitrishniyam, Patanjali says. That means the true happiness comes from within. We have to invoke it from within. We have to tap into it from within. So this passion, the power of passion or intensity comes from within. And he says, Patanjali says, intensity is important. Tivra samveganam asannaha, he says. Tivra means intensity in our practice is important. When we bring that passion, that intensity, the results of yoga come very quickly. They accrue very quickly, is what he says. So that intensity is very important. And I'm also reminded of one of the in one of the verses by Adi Shankara. He says, he talks about vairagya, what happiness that Vairagya does not give. Vairagya is the highest happiness. Kasya sukham na karoti viragaha, he says. What happiness Vairagya does not bring. And in order to illustrate this, actually, in the Bhagavad Gita, there is a very beautiful, like a metaphor that is given. So he says, param drishtva nivartate. That means when you have the taste of the highest, then all other things will lose their charm. For example, when we see the sun, when the sun is shining bright, you don't need a flashlight or you don't need a candle when the sun is shining so bright. So that is where we place dispassion. Dispassion or vairagya does not mean being apathetic or becoming lazy or tamasic. Vairagya means having the wisdom to notice where the true peace or true happiness resides and where it does not reside, having that clarity of thought on that.
Thank you. There were a couple more questions in the chat box, so let me just go through those if you do have a little more time, Shriramji.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, this one is about multitasking. So we talk about multitasking and advertise that it increases productivity. I'm not sure it actually does. And the question is, does it contradict what you are saying and what is your telling on or your feeling on that?
So my interpretation of, so it is not that the yogi does only one thing. They also do many things. But at any given time, their mind is focused on one thing. So there is one sutra where Patanjali talks about it. He says, Tat pradishedartam eka tattva abhyasaha. Eka tattva. Focus your mind on one thing. And we tap into the power of the mind. Sometimes when we do too many things in the same moment, then we are scattering the mind. We are not taking advantage of the resonance or the synergy that comes from the mind. So if you have, say, 5 tasks, then divide the time into 5 segments and do one thing in each of the 5 segments rather than trying to do all 5 things at every moment. You see the difference? We call it time multiplexing in engineering terms. You divide the time.
That is actually true. And from a scientific point of view, I was on the undergraduate education committee for surgery in Canada. And at one of our conferences, actually, we had a physician give a scientific presentation, a research presentation, saying that there is no such thing as multitasking. You think you're doing 2 things at a time, but at any one point in that time, you're focusing on one activity, and then you're quickly flipping between one and the other activity, and the end result is that your efficiency is actually less in each of those activities. So that was a good question. Another
yes, in fact, just to add a little bit on that, so when we flip back and forth between 2 things, notice the mind is no longer in meditation because the pratyaya keeps flipping from one moment to the next. It is different. And so I mentioned that when the pratyaya, the contents of the mind is the same, we conserve that energy because we don't lose that energy in dissipating between this context switch. But there is more to the story. It is not just the conservation of energy, but by being in a state of tranquil and a one-pointed space, we also reduce the wear and tear in the system. To use a technical word, we don't increase entropy. We don't increase chaos. So when we don't increase that entropy or the disorder in the system, then we are able to reduce the wear and tear that happens in the body and mind.
That is very interesting indeed. Another question is about that passion, that enthusiasm you talked about that comes into our everyday life. The question is, we are all born with certain vasanas that are, so strong that goes against our own self at times. So how do we deal with that? How do we bring that enthusiasm on a more permanent basis?
That's another fascinating question, right? You are right. Many times when we talk about a tug of war, there is a war raging inside our system as well. To give a small example, we know that it is a good idea to eat nutritious food and avoid junk food. Intellectually, we know, but the tongue doesn't know that. The tongue says, give me delicious food, junk food. Who cares about nutritious food? So there is a big war that is raging between the tongue and the body's intelligence. So there's a conflict, there's a dvandva that happens inside the system. So with the practice of yoga, what we discover is, remember, yoga, one of the definition of yoga is harmony. When we bring the harmony, when the tongue and the body's intelligence, they become one cohesive entity, then what the body wants and what the tongue wants will slowly start being the same thing. In other words, any nutritious food will feel delicious to us. It comes in due course of practice. They will no longer be divided. When the harmony happens in the body and in the mind, then we can trust the tongue, because we know that what the tongue wants, the body will also benefit by it. What is tasty is also what is nutritious. So that is one example. And Patanjali actually talks about it as this tug of war between two tendencies. You use the word vasanas, and in fact, Patanjali uses the word samskara, a similar word. And he gives one example is, he talks about the tug of war between the samskaras of vyuthana nirodha. Vyuthana means extroverted state of mind. Mind has a tendency to go out and grab things from outside. The opposite tendency of the mind is nirodha samskara. That means to abide in the self, to repose in the self, meditative space, to repose in the meditative space. So there's a tug of war. There's one tendency that is pulling the mind outside, another tendency that is making the mind meditative. So encourage the meditative tendency of the mind and keep strengthening it. And at one point, this will become stronger than the Vyuthana Samskara. So that is the trick to bring about this transformation.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness, you have given us so many practical suggestions today. Trust me, we have learned Patanjali Yoga Sutras for two semesters already. But every time we hear it or hear about it, and from each different person we hear, we learn so much more. So thank you so much for that. And once again, thank you from all of us who are listening. And we hope to see more of you at VaYU. Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I would also like to express my gratitude for giving me this opportunity. And also, I would like to express my intent to actually do a program with VaYU, perhaps a master's or even a PhD program. So I'm greatly looking forward to that. So I wish to learn more and further my knowledge in yoga and learn from all the great teachers in VaYU. So I eagerly look forward to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and namaste, everybody.